Thank you. I would like to call the special Board of Education meeting to order. It is Monday, April 16th, 7:30, and we are in the Nashua High North Boardroom. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Mosher,
I'm here.
Mrs. Oden,
Here.
Mr. Kaufman,
Here.
Ms. Raymond,
Here.
Ms. Timmons,
Here.
Ms. HOHENSEE,
Here.
Ms. Van Twyver,
Here.
Mr. Guarino is here, Ms. Porter.
Here.
Mr. Mosher is joining us by telephone because he's recuperating at home. Are you, is there anyone else in the room with you, Mr. Mosher?
No, nobody, just me, myself, and I.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Bolton is also present at this meeting.
Okay, thank you. And before we go into non-public session, Attorney Bolton is going to clarify some questions that board members have. And the first one is from Ms. HOHENSEE. Can the board take a vote in non-public session?
Yes.
Okay. Are you satisfied, Ms. HOHENSEE?
I would like an explanation of why would be more helpful.
Well, the statute, which discusses non-public sessions, specifically provides for how votes are going to be recorded. So it appears obvious to me that it contemplates votes in non-public session. If one looks at RSA 91-A:3, Roman numeral 3, it says minutes of such sessions shall record all actions in such a manner that the vote of each member is ascertained and recorded. I don't know how it could be any more clear that votes are contemplated to be had in non-public session. Now, you have to be in non-public session properly by way of a proper motion that cites one of the reasons for which non-public sessions may be had, but it is absolutely clear to me and to every lawyer I've asked about this that it wouldn't talk about recording votes if you couldn't take a vote.
My question would be that we're going into non-public, say, to discuss personnel or something like that. You have to give all the topics. And then in the middle of this session, your time runs out and you're taking a vote on a policy issue. That's not what you went in there for. You're going in there and you're voting on whether or not to continue the meeting for 30 more minutes, and that's a policy decision. I didn't know if that was under it, because it's not why you went in. Do you have to come out and then go back in again?
That's not a policy in and of itself. That's the procedure you're going to follow at that particular moment. I would say procedural votes are just like any other vote. If it helps you get to the issue that you're discussing. So, for example, you're considering whether to purchase property. Mm-hmm. And one of your members is unsure that all the necessary information has been gathered, makes a motion to table until the next session or until further information is provided. A vote is taken on that motion fails. So you're back discussing the motion as to whether to authorize the purchase of the property, and you take a vote and you do authorize the purchase of the property. If all those votes have been properly taken, it's perfectly all right. So I would equate a motion to extend the time for discussion as strictly procedural in furtherance of the subject matter that is at issue. Very similar to the motion to postpone to a date in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Van Twyver?
Are you using the word procedural? We have a policy that says you will, take a vote to extend. So are you just saying that because it's a procedure and even though it's written in a policy, it's not policy? That, you understand what I'm saying?
Your policy adopts a certain procedure,
Okay,
and now you're following that procedure.
okay, good enough. Just want to make it clear.
Okay, thank you.
I have a follow-up, if I may.
Mr. Kaufman?
Thank you. So a vote taken in non-public, as long as we duly record it and we seal the minutes, there's no public expression of that vote. Is that right?
Well, you may, depending on what the action taken is, you may or may not find it necessary to seal the minutes. If it was something similar to what I used in the previous example, if you were saying that purchase of such and such property at a price not to exceed $200,000 is authorized, in that case, you might want to keep the minutes confidential so as not to expose the maximum that you're willing to pay. And you might depend on whoever is going to act as your agent in that transaction to try and get the property instead of 200 for 175 or something like that. So you would want to keep those minutes confidential so as not to expose to the other side or the general public the exact limits as to your willingness to pay a certain sum. Other situations, it might be that once you make the decision, it becomes self-executing. For example, in a similar situation, someone has a piece of property and negotiations have taken place, and your agent comes back to you and says, the seller has told us that they're willing to drop the price from 200,000 to 175 if you say yes at your next meeting. Now, you may or may not think that's a good deal, and you may vote not to do it. Or you may think it is a good deal, and you may vote to do it. But if the seller has said it's take it or leave it at that meeting, you may want to say, okay, we're voting to leave it, and we don't care if the minutes get sealed or not, because we've basically irrevocably took our position that we're not interested in the property, or at least not interested in the property at that price. So you can take votes, and you properly record the vote. You're properly in non-public session to begin with, and then the question of sealing or not sealing the minutes is a separate question.
So when we do something like, let's say it's a personnel matter, where we have a committee, they go into non-public to decide to take a recommendation or not. That committee makes a recommendation in non-public back to the committee. I guess the committee would vote and then send that on to the board. So once it got to the committee, by its very nature, that nomination becomes public. But I remember instances where we would go into non-public, and it would more like when we're dealing with negotiations in particular. It would be more of a head nod to get a general consensus or agreement on something, and then we would specifically leave, and then we would vote in public. Like we kind of knew what the vote would be, kind of almost like a poll, if you would, but we then voted in public. Ms. Van, do you?
Yeah, we've done that.
Yeah, so that's my reference point. I think that's something that we experienced here on the board. So I think that's
Well, I don't know whoever told you that that was required, but it's not required. And you can do it that way when you feel it's appropriate, but it is certainly not required.
Attorney Bolton, what used to happen was that when we hired somebody, we would go into non-public to discuss our feelings about it and vote maybe. Then when we come out, we would vote in public to let them know that we have agreed to do this. I mean, that's how I remember us using that. But,
There's nothing improper in doing that, but it is not required.
okay, so we can just come out and say, hey, we're going to hire this person.
You could.
Thank you, sir.
Now, when you're talking about a committee, your committees don't have authority to actually do things, right? Your committees make recommendations to the board. So in that situation, when in non-public in committee, you would almost certainly want to seal those minutes because the board may not go along with the committee's recommendation, or may go along with the committee's recommendation, or may change it in some way. And it may be necessary, depending on the subject matter, that not later be disclosed.
Mr. Kaufman?
Thanks. So in that instance that you just described, where the committee was in non-public, it voted, its minutes are recorded, they went into non-public correctly and all that stuff. So let's say I'm not a member of that committee, and you point out that those minutes are duly noted and recorded. How would I get a copy of those sealed minutes from a committee meeting?
Suppose you'd ask.
Okay, so they're readily available.
All of the board members should have access to all of the committee minutes.
Okay. Including those of non-public.
I would say so.
Thank you.
Ms. O'Hensee?
Thank you. I think this is part of the confusion. We were advised when we went into, say, interviewing a number of candidates, we were advised not to put anything down on paper in terms of a vote. We were polling each other or doing something on the whiteboard, and then we got rid of everything at the end because we weren't supposed to vote in those sessions. So I guess that's where we got the impression that voting was taboo.
Well, I don't know who told you that, but whoever told you that was incorrect. You are allowed to vote in non-public session if it's a proper subject matter for a non-public session, if the motion was correctly stated to get you into non-public session. But if you're obeying all of the requirements of the statute specifically contemplates voting during non-public session.
Yes, I mean, you read the text, that was clear. It's just that we've gone in innumerable times and we're advised in the opposite. So I guess that's where we have the confusion.
You probably didn't do anything incorrect, but you may have done things that were unnecessary.
Mr. Bolton, can I clarify? When we used to interview, they scored candidates number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I believe it was Dover, and I could be wrong, was sued because they said that should be public information where the candidates scored, and it was appealed and ruled that they did not have to make that public because it was part of the hiring process. And while that was in legal turmoil, I guess, that's what we followed here in Nashua when we were interviewing. Is that how you understood it, Ms. Van
Well,
Twyver?
I didn't quite understand it that way. I mean, what I was thinking was that when we had those interview sessions, we had both staff and board members in there. And I didn't know whether that, even though they were the committee, we had staff members, you know, like other teachers and things in there. And I thought maybe that's why we did it that way.
It had to do with a legal, there was a suit over on the seacoast where somebody was hired and the public wanted to see where the candidates scored, and they had used a piece of paper, much like we did at one point, and we stopped using it because of the lawsuit, and then it came back. It was part of the hiring process and did not need to be made public. So that's where that came from. A question comes from something Mr. Hoffman had the other night. Is it legal and/or necessary for a document that was not part of the public portion of a board meeting nor circulated during the board meeting to become minutes, the public minutes of that board meeting?
If a majority of the board wants to attach anything to the minutes, the board can vote to do it. I see nothing illegal about that. I do question the wisdom of having material that was not before the board attached to minutes. I'm not sure what the value of it is, and the utility of your minutes may become less than optimal if there's other material included, but that's a matter for the board to decide, either as a general rule or on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
Madam President?
Ms. Van Twyver?
The question I brought up, what I've been pushing, is the fact that our administration would come and give a presentation that nobody has seen except for that night. And I have pressed upon them that that needs to be part of the minutes, because other people board members or the public who haven't attended should be able to have the same opportunity to review those things. And that was the point I was trying to make. I don't know if that's exactly what Dottie was saying, but.
I think there's no specific law on this either, but I agree that the best practice would be that anything that is distributed or otherwise presented to the board or a committee of the board during meetings should be included with the minutes. I mean, that makes the minutes understandable. Now, what must be included in the minutes, and that's provided by statute, is pretty bare bones. It's, who was present, the subject matter, which members of the board were present. You don't have to list every member of the public who comes in, but which members of the board were present, the subject matters discussed, any decisions made. When you have someone on the participating remotely, all votes have to be by roll call. And so the minutes should reflect the results of any roll call. And when you're in non-public session, you have to take votes in such a way that it can be ascertained how each member voted on the question. So you could have bare bone minutes without all these attachments. But again, I think it would be an appropriate policy for the board to provide that any handouts that are distributed, any PowerPoint presentation, copies of that be included in the minutes, just to make them clear.
Ms. Oden, if I may?
Mr. Kaufman?
Thank you. Well, the situation that presented this was I was given the floor, and then I was prevented from speaking by the chair. And I wanted what would have been my comments in that instance where I had the floor, I wanted my comments added to the record. And right now, that's what the background was before this. So if that were to happen again, the only thing I can think of would be to simply write a letter to the board, right? Address an email to the entire board as myself and get that entered into the public record.
I thought we'd already talked about this, Mr. Kaufman. You're not supposed to send emails to the entire board.
Well, excuse me, Mr. Bolton, please don't interrupt me. So
I'm finished tonight. I'm going home.
we can't do that. We can't just leave. I don't care if you do or not. That's up to you, Mr. Bolton. I'm sad to see that you're going to leave, but we board members can't do that. And I'm sorry.
Mr. Kaufman, you are out of order.
I did not say anything.
We invited
I did
Attorney
not say anything to
Bolton.
antagonize a guest. I'm sorry.
Yes, you did.
I'm sorry, I did not.
Yes, you did.
I was trying to clarify the instance. How else can I get comments when the board chair rules me out of order into the public record? And that's what my question was for Mr. Bolton. So as a member of the public, the only way I can see doing that is to send an email to BOE so it becomes part of that correspondence record. Otherwise, this board can actually shut me down anytime I want to say something, because if you listen to what Mr. Bolton said, and I wrote in my notes, if there was a document to be added to the minutes, it would require a board vote. So that requires, obviously, a majority to move that forward. So in that instance, again, my voice would be denied. So I am trying to find out a way how a member of the board can make a public statement. I guess I'd have to leave the board and make a statement during the public comment period. And I guess if that's what I have to do, I'll do that. I'm sorry that Mr. Bolton left, but I don't feel responsible for him leaving.
I would like to address your issue. When you started to make your comment, It was in response to the superintendent's comments. What you started to read was not about the superintendent's comments, and that's why I ruled you out of order. Do you understand that?
I do understand that, and I've also seen conflicting opinions on that, that ruling that the chair made. So
Where have you seen
there was some
rulings
feedback
different?
in one of the emails that was in response to that. A former alderman, I believe Mr. T-Boom, cited that any topic is relevant, any topic to the district is relevant for that comment.
This goes back to at least 2011. There is opportunity at the end of the meeting for board member comments. That period there, just as we asked the public to speak to items on the agenda at the beginning of the meeting, that time there is set aside for response to the superintendent's comments. And that's why I was not censoring you, as Mrs. HOHENSEE has claimed. It was not censoring you. You were not following the rules, and that's why I gavelled you out of order. I have never censored anybody. When you raise your hand, I've always acknowledged everybody on the board. I've tried, but you were not following the rules of the meeting, the way we've operated.
May I?
You
Thank
can
you.
respond.
So as far as my using the superintendent's comment to make a comment, that's also because in prior meetings, and I think the one immediately before that, the public comment period was truncated. So the point that you're making is that we have an opportunity at the end of the meeting to speak in 3 of 6 meetings this year has been denied. So the only opportunities, those of us that have something to say, in the context of an agenda item is either there or at the end of a meeting. And the way the meetings have been conducted, there's been no guarantee that we would even have even a public comment at the end of a meeting or even a board member comment at the end of the meeting. And as far as censorship goes, I would like to point out, since you brought it up, that at the last meeting I had several items on the agenda that were skipped over in lieu and other items given preference. So for me, having followed the procedural requirements of putting those things into, requesting the chair, put those on the agenda, which you did, but it was a form of censorship to me, whereby my items that you just correctly put on the agenda were skipped over, and that you addressed other items on the agenda that, and then we continued the meeting on and on and on, and yet those agenda items that I brought forth were never discussed. So for me, I'll just disagree with you, Ms. Oden, that's a form of censorship.
But I will say, I asked for the approval of committee assignments. I thought that was important to finish at that meeting, and as board president, I am expected to try to run the board as efficiently as possible. It also was approval of the police training. The police training affects over 11,000 students, over 1,000 staff members, and the police had come, and I thought it was important to take action. It was probably 2 minutes to do both of those things, maybe 3 minutes for both of them. So I will put it to a vote next time, and majority would rule, because I asked Attorney Bolton if that's possible, and he said yes. So we will bring it to a vote next time if we're running into a time commitment. Ms. HOHENSEE, you have your hand up?
Thank you. I found it ironic that Mr. COFFMAN's topic, which was ruled out of order, was the same as the 2 student representatives. It was the exact same
Excuse me, I'm sorry, you're
topic.
out of order.
Now, my topic was different, but this was the ruling of the president that it had to be in direct response to the superintendent, which we didn't know in advance. We couldn't prepare anything. And for the 2.5 years that I've been on this board, that was never the policy, that it had to be in direct response to the superintendent's comment. And I bet if I went back and looked at, the past 30 board meetings, there isn't a one-to-one correspondence. So that was new. That took me off guard. I acquiesced. I said I felt it was censorship. I still feel it was censorship. And I just don't think it's the way to run a meeting. If he gave us his remarks in advance and we had time to think about them and prepare our response, that would be very different than he comes in, hits us with something, and then we're supposed to respond immediately. That's not usually the way we've operated here before. A lot of times people come in with a list of things that they want to respond to. That have been happening over the past week to different actions that the administration takes. It's not in that direct response to we can do better, which was what his theme was that night. I mean, I could have taken that and twisted it and said, we can do better, oh no, maybe not, and then gone on to my other thing, but I wasn't playing that game. And I do feel it was censorship. And if you do it again, and the board acquiesces and confirms it, I will still feel that it was censorship. I don't think that Mr. COFFMAN is not allowed to talk about the walkout, which I had talked about previously and had no need to talk about it. Then the two students talked about the walkout. And I really appreciated hearing their points of view. It was interesting. I just think if we start censoring the content of which each member says and contributes to this board, we're going down a very, very bad path.
Okay. I will say, my experience, 4 years on the board, it has been, to my recollection, that people spoke to what the superintendent had mentioned. I also made it clear the other night that the students' board, the student members of the board, just make comments to the board. They do not have to make comments to the superintendent. If you read the agenda, it's very clear. Excuse me, it's very clear. Ms. Timmons?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Odom. Can you put it down more? Okay, thank you, Ms. Odoms. One of the things that happened at this board meeting is nine board members. It's not 3, it's not 2, it's not 1. It's 9 of us. And the 9 board members don't have a chance to say anything because there's one person that monopolized every single board meeting, every single committee meeting, and we don't have a chance. If we want to stay here for 3 or 4 hours, like you suggest we do, then yes, we will be able to say something. But when you monopolize the board meeting and we don't have a chance to cover the agenda, that's what happens. We have to skip over some things just to get through the agenda because one person monopolizes every single board meeting, would like to himself speak and say the same thing over and over and over again. And the fact that you let our attorney leave because you said the same thing before, that's why he got upset. You didn't have to do that. I don't know what point you're trying to do, but I'm saying to you, you are always monopolizing every single board meeting, and that's the problem. And so if Ms. Odom wants to skip over some of the agenda just to get through some of the things, then I think it's appropriate. It's not censoring you, it's just that you monopolizes everything. And I'd like to say one other thing too. Can I, at this time, read my prepared letter? I mean, is it appropriate? I don't know. I'd like to read this.
Could you wait until does it
Absolutely.
have to do with this?
No.
I know.
We're here for non-public.
Can it
I
wait until a
asked her,
board meeting?
can I read it? And she said, not now. So I respect that and won't read it. But I'm just saying how you monopolizes everything, and that's why we don't get through the agenda.
Mr. Guarino.
Thank you, Madam President. Since Attorney Bolton has left, we're probably not going to be able to go into non-public. We won't have any questions before this board, so we should probably not go on any further. We're just going back and forth, and I think what we really, we're just rehashing old fights. And I think what we need to do is have respect for the president of the board. I don't see any respect for the president. And in any meeting you go to, you can go to the Board of Selectmen meeting, you can go to any meeting, you can take things out of order in the agenda. It's not censorship, okay? No one is censored. You know, you get plenty of opportunity to speak. No one is censored. It's just not true. So I would like to make a motion, Madam President, to adjourn this meeting because
I
we have...
second that motion.
We have no questions before the board, and we're just going to go on and on. We're not going to get anything accomplished.
Point of order,
There's a motion on the floor to
There's a
adjourn, and I
motion on
second
the
that.
floor.
point of order.
What's your point of order, Ms. O'Hensey?
I would like to ask, Madam President, if we cannot, or is it not possible that we could go into non-public to discuss the same matter that we were going to discuss without the attorney amongst ourselves?
No, no, we needed some legal advice. I'm sorry that
It would-
Attorney Bolton left, but no.
Oops, I got the wrong page here. Sorry. Okay,
Did any-
on the motion,
There's a
Did
comment
does
here, Ms. Oden.
anybody want to speak to the motion?
Right here.
Ms.
well,
Vin-
this is I'm sorry, excuse me, it should be non-debatable to adjourn.
No.
No, it's
I
not.
do not believe it's debatable.
No, it is not debatable, nor amendable. It does require a second, however.
I
Timmons,
second.
Ms. Timmons had seconded it. So, shall I take the roll to adjourn?
Yes, you may.
On the motion to adjourn, Mr. Mosher,
Yes, I'll second that.
Ms. Oden,
Yes.
Mr. Kaufman,
No.
Ms. Raymond,
Yes.
Ms. Timmons,
Yes.
Ms. Hohensee,
No.
Ms. Van Twyver,
No.
Mr. Guarino votes yes, Ms. Porter.
Yes.
The motion carries 6-3. The meeting is adjourned at 8:02 PM.